The cursor blinked accusingly, each flash a reminder of the email I shouldn't have opened. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed by the weight of what I'd just discovered. Tony, my husband of 10 years, was having an affair. Rebecca, you coming down for dinner? Tony's voice floated up the stairs, shattering my stunned silence. I swallowed hard, willing my voice to remain steady. Just a minute. Closing the laptop, I took a deep breath and made my way downstairs. The aroma of Tony's signature pasta dish filled the air, but my stomach churned with nausea. Tony stood at the stove, stirring a pot of sauce. He glanced up, flashing that charming smile that had once made my heart flutter. Now it made my skin crawl. There you are, he said. I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost in your work again. I forced a smile. Just wrapping up a few things. As I set the table, my mind raced. How long had this been going on? Who was she? The email had been vague, but the intimacy was unmistakable. So how was your day? Tony asked, ladling sauce over perfectly al dente penne. I stared at the plate before me, the red sauce suddenly reminding me of the anger bubbling just beneath my surface. Fine, I managed. Yours? Oh, same old academic grind, he chuckled. Sometimes I wonder if these students even appreciate the caliber of education they're receiving. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to remind him that not everyone had the privilege of an Ivy League education. It was an old argument, one that always left me feeling small and inadequate. Speaking of which, Tony continued, oblivious to my inner turmoil, Mother called today. She's insisting we attend the university's fundraising gala next month. I suppressed a groan. Martha, my mother-in-law, was a force to be reckoned with. Do we have to? Tony's eyes narrowed. Rebecca, you know how important these events are. It's not just about the university. It's about maintaining our standing in the community. Our standing. As if I had any part in it beyond being Tony's arm candy at stuffy academic functions. Of course, I said, pushing the pasta around my plate. I'll make sure to clear my schedule. Tony nodded, satisfied. Good. Oh, and Mother mentioned she'd like to have lunch with you next week. Something about helping you select an appropriate gown for the gala. I gripped my fork tighter, imagining Martha's thinly veiled criticisms of my fashion choices. How thoughtful of her. Now, Rebecca, Tony said, his tone patronizing, I know you and Mother don't always see eye to eye, but she means well. Try to appreciate her guidance. I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the condescension, the suffocating expectations. Tony, I need to ask you something. He looked up, a fork full of pasta halfway to his mouth. Yes? Who's Melanie? The color drained from Tony's face. He set his fork down slowly. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice trembling. I saw the email, Tony. I know about the affair. For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. Then Tony's expression hardened. You went through my emails? That's a violation of my privacy, Rebecca. I laughed bitterly. Your privacy? What about our marriage vows? You're being hysterical, Tony said, standing up. This is exactly why I can't discuss certain aspects of my life with you. You're too emotional, too quick to jump to conclusions. Conclusions, I sputtered. Tony, I read the email. It was clear as day. He shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. Rebecca, darling, you're misinterpreting things. This is why I've always said your lack of higher education leaves you at a disadvantage. You don't have the critical thinking skills to... The sound of my hand connecting with his cheek echoed through the kitchen. Tony stumbled back, shock written across his face. How dare you? I hissed. How dare you try to gaslight me and insult my intelligence in the same breath? As Tony opened his mouth to respond, my phone buzzed. A text from my father. Hey, sweetie, just checking in. Everything okay? I grabbed my phone and car keys. I'm leaving, I announced. Don't wait up. As I slammed the front door behind me, I realized my hands were shaking. What had I just done? Where would I go? For the first time in years, I felt truly alone. I spent the night at a nearby hotel, tossing and turning as my mind replayed every moment of my confrontation with Tony. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. I needed answers, and I wasn't leaving our house until I got them. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Tony's car was still there. Good. No running away this time. I found him in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as I entered, his eyes bloodshot and weary. Rebecca, he said, his voice hoarse. I was worried sick. Where were you? Don't pretend you care, I snapped. We need to talk about Melanie. Tony's jaw clenched. I told you, you're misinterpreting things. Then explain it to me, Tony. Help me understand how I'm misinterpreting an email where you tell another woman you can't wait to hold her in your arms again. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It's not what you think. She's a colleague. We're working on a sensitive case together. I laughed bitterly. A case that requires declarations of love? It's complicated, Rebecca. There are aspects of my work that you wouldn't understand. Try me, I challenged. Tony stood up, towering over me. This is exactly why I can't discuss these things with you. You lack the educational background to grasp the nuances of legal strategy. His words stung, but I refused to back down. Don't you dare use my education as an excuse for your infidelity. I may not have an Ivy League degree, but I'm not stupid, Tony. I never said you were stupid, he retorted. But there's a reason I'm the one working at a prestigious law firm while you play around at your little tech startup. Rage boiled inside me. Play around? I'm the director of operations at a company that's revolutionizing green energy. Just because it's not some centuries-old boys' club doesn't make it any less valuable. Tony scoffed. Please, we both know your father pulled strings to get you that job. How dare you? I hissed. I earned my position through hard work and talent, unlike you, who rode Daddy's coattails straight into the family firm. His eyes flashed dangerously. Watch your mouth, Rebecca. You have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, I think I do, I shot back. I think I'm finally seeing you clearly for the first time in our marriage. You're nothing but a narcissistic, cheating bastard who... The sharp ring of the doorbell cut through our argument. We both froze, staring at each other. Who could that be? I asked. Tony's face paled. I'm not sure. I moved towards the door, but Tony grabbed my arm. Wait, Rebecca. Let me get it. His sudden nervousness set off alarm bells in my head. I yanked my arm free and strode to the front door, throwing it open. A statuesque blonde stood on our porch, her perfect makeup unable to hide her surprise at seeing me. Oh, she said, her voice soft and cultured. I'm sorry, I must have the wrong house. I'm looking for Tony Green. My stomach dropped. You've got the right house, I said coldly. And you are? She blinked, confusion evident on her face. I'm Melanie Cartwright. Tony and I work together at the firm, and you are? I'm Rebecca, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Tony's wife. Melanie's eyes widened in shock. Wife? But Tony said he told me he was divorced. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the doorframe for support, turning to face Tony, who stood frozen in the hallway. You told her we were divorced? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tony's face was ashen. Rebecca, I can explain. But I'd heard enough. I turned back to Melanie, whose perfect composure had crumbled into distress. I think you'd better come in, I said. It seems we have a lot to discuss. As Melanie stepped inside, I caught a glimpse of our neighbor across the street, watching the scene unfold with undisguised interest. In that moment, I realized our carefully constructed life was about to come crashing down around us. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop it. The aftermath of Melanie's visit left our house feeling like a war zone. Tony had retreated to his study, leaving me to deal with the emotional wreckage. I was just about to call my father when the doorbell rang again. This time it was Martha, Tony's mother, her face pinched with concern. Rebecca, dear, she said, brushing past me into the foyer. I just ran into Diane across the street. She said there was quite a scene here earlier. What on earth is going on? I sighed, closing the door. Martha, now's not really a good time. She waved her hand dismissively. Nonsense. Where's Anthony? I need to speak with him immediately. Before I could stop her, Martha marched towards Tony's study. I followed, my stomach knotting with dread. Tony looked up as we entered, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Mother, what are you doing here? Martha's eyes darted between us. I came to find out what all this fuss is about. Anthony, explain yourself. Tony shot me a pleading look, but I crossed my arms, refusing to bail him out. He swallowed hard. Mother, there's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I scoffed. Is that what we're calling it now? Martha's eyes narrowed. Rebecca, please, let Anthony speak. I bit my tongue, seething as Tony spun a web of half-truths and outright lies. He painted Melanie as a confused colleague, me as an overreacting, jealous wife. With each word, I felt my anger rising. That's not what happened, I interjected. Tony's been having an affair. He told Melanie we were divorced, Martha gasped, turning to Tony. Anthony, is this true? Tony's face hardened. Of course not, Mother. Rebecca's letting her imagination run wild again. You know how she gets. How I get? I sputtered. You lying, manipulative. That's quite enough, Martha cut in. She turned to me, her voice ice cold. Rebecca, I think you need to calm down and stop making these wild accusations. Anthony is a respected member of this community. He would never engage in such behavior. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? You're just going to take his word for it? Martha drew herself up to her full height. I know my son, Rebecca. Perhaps if you'd put as much effort into your marriage as you do into your little career, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The room fell silent. I stared at Martha, then at Tony, who couldn't even meet my eyes. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Martha blinked. Excuse me? I said, get out. Both of you. This is my house, too, and I want you out. Tony stood up. Rebecca, you're being hysterical. Let's all calm down and... No, I cut him off. I'm done calming down. I'm done being gaslighted and belittled. Get out of my house now. Martha looked to Tony, clearly expecting him to put me in my place. But something in my expression must have warned him off because he simply nodded. Come on, Mother, he said softly. Let's give Rebecca some space. As they left, I sank onto the couch, my whole body shaking. The house felt suddenly empty, echoing with the ghosts of all the lies and betrayals that had filled it. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. On my way, sweetie. Hang in there. Tears welled up in my eyes. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone in this fight. As I waited for my father to arrive, I began to plan. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about saving myself. And I was done playing by Tony's rules. I picked up my laptop, determination stealing my resolve. It was time to dig deeper into Tony's life, his work, his secrets. If he wanted a war, I'd give him one. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. My father's steady presence had been a balm to my frayed nerves, but as he prepared to leave after a week-long visit, anxiety gnawed at my insides. I'd been avoiding Tony, throwing myself into work and my clandestine investigation of his affairs, both personal and professional. You sure you'll be all right, Becky? Dad asked, his weathered hands gripping his suitcase. I forced a smile. I'll be fine, Dad. Thanks for everything. As I watched his car disappear down the street, I steeled myself for what I needed to do next. I'd stumbled upon some troubling discrepancies in Tony's firm's financial records, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. Back in my home office, I pored over the documents I'd managed to access. Numbers swam before my eyes, but a pattern was emerging, one that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just an affair. Tony had been embezzling funds from the firm. My hands shook as I picked up my phone. I had to be sure. Melanie? It's Rebecca. We need to talk. An hour later, I sat across from Melanie in a quiet cafe, watching her face crumple as I laid out my suspicions. I had no idea, she whispered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously on the table. I mean, I knew something was off with some of the accounts, but Tony always had an explanation. He's good at that, I said bitterly. Explanations, excuses, lies. Melanie's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of guilt and determination. What can I do to help? Together, we pieced together the extent of Tony's deception. By the time we parted ways, I felt simultaneously vindicated and devastated. The man I'd married was a fraud in every sense of the word. Back home, I sat in the darkening living room, my mind racing. What was my next move? Confront Tony? Go to the authorities? My finger hovered over my father's number in my phone when I heard the front door open. Rebecca? Tony's voice called out. Are you home? I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. In here. Tony appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, a forced smile on his face. Hey, I thought we could order in tonight, maybe talk things over? Sure, I said, keeping my voice neutral. We definitely need to talk. As Tony busied himself with menus, I watched him, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The charm, the confidence, it was all a carefully constructed facade. So, Tony said, settling into his armchair. I know things have been tense lately, but I really think we can work this out. Maybe take a vacation, just the two of us. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. A vacation won't fix this, Tony. His smile faltered. What do you mean? I know about the embezzlement, I said quietly. The color drained from Tony's face. For a moment he looked like he might deny it, but then his shoulders sagged. How did you find out? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Does it matter? I countered. What matters is what happens next. Tony leaned forward, his eyes suddenly sharp. Rebecca, think carefully about what you're doing. If this gets out, it won't just be me who suffers. Your reputation, your career, they'll be tainted too. I felt a chill run down my spine at the thinly veiled threat. Are you trying to blackmail me, Tony? He spread his hands in a placating gesture. I'm just pointing out the reality of the situation. We're in this together, whether you like it or not. As I stared at the stranger sitting across from me, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could give in to fear, become complicit in Tony's crimes to save my own skin. Or I could stand up for what was right. Consequences be damned. My phone buzzed, a text from Melanie. I've gathered more evidence. What's our next step? In that moment I made my decision. I stood up, my voice steady as I addressed my husband. No, Tony, we're not in this together, not anymore. As I walked out of the room, leaving Tony sputtering behind me, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, I was choosing my own path, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The morning after my confrontation with Tony, I woke to an empty house and a sense of foreboding. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Martha, each more accusatory than the last. I ignored them, focusing instead on my plan to expose Tony's misdeeds. As I sipped my coffee, a sharp knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find two stern-faced men in suits. Mrs. Green? I'm Detective Simmons. This is Detective Ramos. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your husband's financial activities. My heart raced as I let them in. Of course, but I'm not sure how much help I can be. Detective Simmons fixed me with a penetrating stare. Mrs. Green, we have reason to believe you may have been involved in your husband's embezzlement scheme. The room spun. What? No, that's impossible. I had no idea until recently. We have evidence of large transfers from the firm's accounts to a joint account in both your names, Detective Ramos interjected. Can you explain that? I felt the blood drain from my face. Tony had set me up. He'd made me an unwitting accomplice. I need to call my lawyer, I stammered. The detectives exchanged glances. We'll be in touch, Mrs. Green. Don't leave town. As soon as they left, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind reeling. How could I have been so naive? I'd underestimated Tony's capacity for manipulation. My phone rang. It was Melanie. Rebecca? I just got questioned by the police. What's going on? I filled her in, my voice shaking. Tony's trying to frame me, Melanie. He's always been 10 steps ahead. Not this time, Melanie said firmly. I've been doing some digging of my own. Meet me at the cafe in an hour. There's something you need to see. An hour later, I sat across from Melanie, staring at the documents she'd spread before me. Bank statements, emails, memos, all pointing to a conspiracy far larger than I'd imagined. It's not just Tony, Melanie explained. Half the partners are involved. They've been siphoning funds for years, using offshore accounts and shell companies. I felt sick. Why are you showing me this? Melanie's eyes met mine. Because you're the only one I trust to do the right thing. We can bring them all down, Rebecca, but it's going to be dangerous. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Tony. Come home, we need to talk. I showed Melanie the message. She gripped my hand. Be careful, he's desperate now. I nodded, gathering the documents. I will, thank you, Melanie, for everything. The drive home felt like a march to the gallows. I found Tony in his study, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand despite the early hour. I assume you've spoken to the police, he said, his voice eerily calm. I nodded, my hand clutching my bag with Melanie's documents. Why, Tony? Why did you do it? He laughed bitterly. You wouldn't understand. The pressure, the expectations, I had to keep up appearances. By stealing, by framing me, I felt my anger rising. Tony stood, swaying slightly. It wasn't supposed to go this far, but I can fix this, Rebecca. We can fix this, together. He moved towards me, his eyes pleading. Just tell the police you were involved. Take some of the blame. With your clean record, you'll get a slap on the wrist. I'll make sure of it. I stared at him, horrified. You want me to confess to crimes I didn't commit? It's the only way, Tony insisted. Otherwise, we'll both go down. Is that what you want? For a moment, I wavered. The thought of prison, of scandal, of losing everything I'd worked for, it was terrifying. But then I thought of my father, of Melanie, of all the people who believed in me. I straightened my spine, meeting Tony's gaze. No, Tony, I won't do it. In fact, I'm going to tell the police everything I know about you, about the partners, all of it. Tony's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You can't do that. I won't let you ruin everything. As I struggled to break free, my bag fell, spilling Melanie's documents across the floor. Tony's eyes widened as he saw the incriminating evidence. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I had to make a choice, protect myself and the truth, or give in to Tony's manipulation one last time. Taking a deep breath, I made my decision. I clutched the documents to my chest, my heart pounding as I raced out of the house. Tony's enraged shouts faded behind me as I jumped into my car and sped away. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination. I knew what I had to do, but the weight of it all threatened to crush me. My phone rang. It was my father. Becky, are you all right? I've been trying to reach you. Dad, I choked out, fighting back tears. I need your help. Can you meet me at my office? I'm on my way, he said without hesitation. I arrived at the tech startup where I worked, grateful for the weekend quiet. As I waited for my father, I paced the empty office, my thoughts racing. How had my life come to this? When Dad arrived, his worried expression deepened as I poured out the whole sordid story. Tony's affair, the embezzlement, the police investigation, and now his attempt to frame me. Oh, sweetheart, Dad said, pulling me into a hug. I'm so sorry you're going through this, but I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right. His words gave me strength. Thanks, Dad, but I don't know what to do next. If I go to the police, Tony might find a way to twist it against me. Dad's eyes lit up with an idea. What about your company's legal team? They're not connected to Tony's firm, and they have a vested interest in protecting you and the company. It was like a light bulb went off. Dad, you're a genius. I immediately called Sarah, our lead counsel. Despite it being a Saturday, she agreed to meet us at the office within the hour. As we waited, I organized the evidence, my hands shaking slightly. What if this backfires, Dad? What if I lose everything? He squeezed my shoulder. You won't lose everything, Becky. You'll always have me, and you'll have your integrity. That's worth more than any job or reputation. Sarah arrived looking concerned. Rebecca, what's going on? Your message sounded urgent. I took a deep breath and launched into my explanation, laying out the documents as I spoke. Sarah's expression grew increasingly grave. This is extensive, she said, poring over the evidence. And you're sure you had no knowledge of this before? I nodded emphatically. None. I only discovered it recently, and when I confronted Tony, he tried to manipulate me into taking the fall. Sarah's jaw tightened. We need to act fast. I'm going to call in the rest of the team and our outside counsel. Rebecca, we're going to protect you and the company, but you need to be prepared. This is going to get messy. As Sarah made calls, I felt a mix of relief and terror. There was no going back now. The next few hours were a blur of legal jargon and strategy sessions. By Sunday evening, we had a plan in place. I would give a full statement to the authorities with our legal team present to ensure I was protected. Just as we were wrapping up, my phone exploded with notifications. My blood ran cold as I saw the breaking news headline, Prominent Law Firm Under Investigation for Massive Fraud Scheme. Tony's face stared back at me from the screen, his usual smug smile replaced by a look of panic as he was led away in handcuffs. It started, Sarah said grimly. Rebecca, are you ready for this? Once we make your statement, there's no turning back. Your life will never be the same. I looked at my father, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Sarah and the team of lawyers ready to fight for me. In that moment, I felt a surge of strength I didn't know I possessed. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. Let's end this. As we prepared to leave for the police station, I took one last look around my office. Whatever happened next, I knew I was fighting for my future, my integrity, and the truth. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The police station buzzed with activity as I sat in the interrogation room, my father and Sarah flanking me protectively. I just finished giving my statement, laying bare every detail of Tony's deception and the firm's widespread corruption. The weight of my words hung heavy in the air. Detective Simmons leaned back, his expression a mix of surprise and respect. "Mrs. Green, I have to say, this is one of the most comprehensive whistleblower statements I've ever heard. You've given us a lot to work with." I nodded, exhausted but resolute. "I just want the truth to come out." As we prepared to leave, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Angry shouts echoed, growing louder by the second. Suddenly, the door burst open, and there stood Tony, his face contorted with rage, flanked by 2 officers struggling to restrain him. "You backstabbing bitch!" he snarled, lunging towards me. The officers held him back as my father stepped protectively in front of me. "How could you do this to me? To us?" I stood my ground, meeting his gaze steadily. "I didn't do this to us, Tony. You did. With every lie, every betrayal, every time you made me feel small. It ends now." Tony's eyes darted wildly around the room, desperation etched on his face. "Rebecca, please, we can still fix this. I'll do anything. Just tell them you made a mistake, that you misunderstood." "No, Tony." I cut him off, my voice firm. "No more lies, no more manipulation. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between us, final and irrevocable. Tony's face crumpled, the fight draining out of him. As the officers led him away, I caught a glimpse of Martha in the hallway, her face pale with shock. "Rebecca," she called out, her voice trembling. "What have you done? You've destroyed our family." I turned to her, feeling a mix of pity and frustration. "Martha, your son destroyed this family long before I exposed the truth. I'm sorry, but I won't be your scapegoat anymore." As we left the station, a swarm of reporters descended upon us. Camera flashes blinded me as questions were shouted from all directions. Sarah stepped in, her voice calm but firm. "My client has no comment at this time. We ask that you respect her privacy during this difficult period." We pushed through the crowd to my father's waiting car. As we drove away, I watched the chaos recede in the rearview mirror, feeling both liberated and overwhelmed. "You did good, Becky," my father said softly, squeezing my hand. "I'm so proud of you." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Thanks, Dad. I can't believe it's all really happening." Sarah's phone buzzed incessantly. She glanced at it, her eyes widening. "Rebecca, the story's breaking on all major news outlets. Tony's firm is in freefall, the partners are turning on each other, and there are rumors of a federal investigation." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. The magnitude of what I'd set in motion was staggering. "What happens now?" "Now," Sarah said, her tone serious, "we prepare for the fallout. There will be depositions, possibly a trial. Your life will be under a microscope. Are you ready for that?" The weight of her words settled on my shoulders. Was I ready? Could anyone truly be ready for something like this? As if sensing my doubt, my father spoke up. "You're stronger than you know, Becky. You've already faced the hardest part. Whatever comes next, you won't face it alone." I nodded, drawing strength from his words. As we pulled up to my house, the house I'd shared with Tony, I steeled myself for what lay ahead. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with challenges I couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in years, I felt truly in control of my own destiny. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and towards my future, ready to face whatever came next. The storm was far from over, but I was no longer afraid of the rain. The courtroom fell silent as the judge entered. My heart pounded as I sat beside Sarah, our eyes fixed on Tony across the aisle. He looked haggard, a shadow of the confident man I'd married. As the verdict was read, a wave of emotions washed over me. In the matter of embezzlement and fraud, we find the defendant, Anthony Green, guilty on all counts. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. I closed my eyes, relief and sadness warring within me. It was over. Finally, truly over. As Tony was led away in handcuffs, his eyes met mine one last time. I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, buried beneath layers of deceit and arrogance. But it was too late for redemption. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Sarah fielded their questions while I stood silently, overwhelmed by the finality of it all. "Rebecca?" A familiar voice cut through the chaos. I turned to see Melanie pushing through the crowd. She enveloped me in a tight hug. "You did it. You actually did it." I hugged her back, tears threatening to spill. "We did it. I couldn't have done this without you." As we pulled apart, I noticed Martha standing at the edge of the crowd, looking lost and defeated. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of understanding pass between us. We'd both been victims of Tony's manipulation, in our own ways. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Tony's firm collapsed under the weight of the scandal, taking down several other high-profile lawyers with it. Martha, stripped of her social status and financial security, retreated from public life. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the challenges of my tech startup. My colleagues rallied around me, their support unwavering in the face of the media frenzy. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Jim, my father, waiting by my car. "Thought you could use some company," he said with a warm smile. We ended up at a small diner, sharing a plate of fries like we used to when I was young. "How are you really doing, Becky?" he asked, his eyes full of concern. I sighed, stirring my coffee absently. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Some days I feel strong, like I can take on the world. Other days, I wonder if I'll ever trust anyone again." Dad reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You will. It'll take time, but you will. You're the strongest person I know, Rebecca. You stood up for what's right, even when it cost you everything." His words struck a chord. "Not everything," I said softly. "I still have you. I still have my integrity." As we left the diner, a young woman approached us hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Rebecca Matthews?" I nodded, bracing myself for another reporter's questions. Instead, she smiled shyly. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story, it gave me the courage to leave my own abusive relationship. You showed me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." I was stunned. "I thank you for telling me that. Stay strong." As she walked away, I felt a shift inside me. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a sense of purpose beyond my own survival. In the months that followed, I started speaking at women's shelters and support groups, sharing my story and offering hope to others trapped in toxic relationships. It wasn't easy, reliving the pain and betrayal, but every time I saw a spark of recognition or determination in someone's eyes, I knew it was worth it. 1 year to the day after Tony's conviction, I stood before a packed auditorium, preparing to give a keynote speech at a conference for survivors of domestic abuse and financial fraud. As I looked out at the sea of faces, women of all ages, each with their own story of resilience, I felt a surge of strength and clarity. "My name is Rebecca Matthews," I began, my voice steady and clear, "and this is my story of reclaiming my life from the ruins of betrayal and finding strength I never knew I had." As I spoke, I realized that this moment of connection, of shared strength and hope, was the true resolution of my journey. I had not only survived, I had found a way to thrive and to help others do the same. The applause that followed my speech washed over me like a cleansing wave. I stood tall, no longer defined by my past, but by the woman I had become. Strong, resilient, and finally truly free. The sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the house, followed by a shrill cry. "Sophia, come quickly." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and counted to 5 before responding. "Coming, Layla," I called, forcing a cheerful tone into my voice. As I hurried up the stairs, I couldn't help but wonder what fresh drama awaited me this time. My mother-in-law, Layla, had been living with us for 6 months now, ever since her mysterious illness had rendered her incapable of living alone. At least that's what she claimed. I found her in the guest bedroom, perched on the edge of her bed with a distressed look on her face. Shards of what used to be her favorite teacup lay scattered across the hardwood floor. "Oh, Sophia, thank goodness you're here," Layla said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, dear. My hands just aren't what they used to be." I plastered on a smile. "Don't worry about it, Layla. I'll clean it up." As I bent down to gather the broken pieces, Layla continued, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Sophia. You're such a blessing." I bit my tongue to keep from saying what I really thought. Instead, I asked, "Do you need anything else while I'm here?" Layla's eyes lit up. "Actually, yes. Could you be a dear and run to the store? I'm craving those little lemon tarts from the bakery across town." I glanced at my watch. It was already 5:30 p.m., and I hadn't even started dinner. "Layla, it's rush hour. That bakery is on the other side of the city. It would take me at least an hour to get there and back." Her face fell. "Oh, I see. I just thought. Never mind. I'm sure I can manage without them." The guilt trip was coming, right on cue. I sighed, knowing I was about to cave. "All right, I'll go, but it might be a while before I'm back." Layla beamed. "You're an angel, Sophia, truly." As I drove across town, stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of resentment. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would be at 38. I had a successful career, a loving husband, and plans for the future. Now it felt like everything revolved around Layla's needs and whims. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Where are you? I'm home early." I typed back quickly, "Running an errand for your mother. Be back soon." When I finally returned home, laden with lemon tarts, I found Ethan in the kitchen, looking confused. "Hey," he said, giving me a quick kiss. "I thought you'd be home. What's all this?" I held up the bakery box. "Your mother had a craving." Ethan's brow furrowed. "You drove all the way across town during rush hour for tarts?" "She dropped her teacup and seemed upset. I thought it might cheer her up," I explained, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Ethan sighed. "Sophia, you don't have to do everything she asks, you know? Mom's not as helpless as she lets on." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and have you told her that?" Before Ethan could respond, Layla's voice floated down from upstairs. "Sophia? Ethan, is that you?" "Yes, Mom," Ethan called back. "We're down here." Layla appeared at the top of the stairs, moving slowly and gripping the railing. "Oh, good. I was worried about you, Sophia. The roads can be so dangerous at this time of day." As she made her way down, I noticed how steady her movements were, despite her supposed frailty. A seed of doubt began to take root in my mind. Layla's eyes lit up when she saw the bakery box. "Oh, you got the tarts. How wonderful. Ethan, your wife is simply the best. Don't you agree?" Ethan nodded, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. For the first time, I wondered if he was starting to see what I had suspected all along. As we settled in for another evening catering to Layla's every need, I made a silent promise to myself. Something had to change, and soon. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a life I never asked for. The question was, how far was I willing to go to reclaim my freedom? The next morning, I woke to the sound of hushed voices coming from downstairs. Curious, I crept down the stairs, careful to avoid the creaky step near the bottom. "Ethan, darling," Layla's voice drifted from the kitchen. "I'm worried about Sophia. She seems so stressed lately." I froze, straining to hear Ethan's response. "Mom, she's fine. She's just adjusting to the new situation." Layla sighed dramatically. "I just feel terrible, being such a burden on you both. Maybe it would be best if I went to a nursing home." My heart leaped at the possibility, but Ethan's response crushed that fleeting hope. "Don't be ridiculous, Mom. We're not sending you to a home. We'll figure something out." I chose that moment to make my presence known, walking into the kitchen with a forced smile. "Good morning, you two. What's going on?" Layla's face transformed instantly, a mask of cheerful innocence sliding into place. "Oh, Sophia, we were just discussing how we could make things easier for you, dear." Ethan nodded, his expression earnest. "Mom thinks she's being a burden, but I assured her that's not the case." I bit back the urge to agree with Layla's assessment. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and said, "Of course not. We're family, after all." Layla beamed, but there was a glint in her eye that made me uneasy. "You're so kind, Sophia, but I was thinking perhaps it would be best if someone was here full-time to help me. I hate to ask, but—" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Full-time, but I have a job, Layla. We can't afford to hire a nurse." Ethan cleared his throat. "Actually, I was thinking maybe you could take a leave of absence from work, just for a little while until Mom's better." The mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. Coffee splashed across the tile, but I barely noticed. "You want me to quit my job?" "Not quit," Ethan said quickly. "Just take some time off. We can manage on my salary for a while." I stared at him, disbelief and anger warring inside me. "Ethan, can I talk to you privately for a moment?" We stepped into the living room, leaving Layla in the kitchen. As soon as we were out of earshot, I hissed, "Have you lost your mind? I can't just abandon my career." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, looking torn. "It's not forever, Sophia. Mom needs us right now." "And what about what I need?" I demanded. "What about our plans, our future?" "This is temporary," Ethan insisted. "Please, Sophia, I don't know what else to do." I closed my eyes, feeling trapped. The weight of expectation and guilt pressed down on me, suffocating my protests. Finally, I whispered, "Fine, I'll do it. But this can't go on indefinitely, Ethan." He pulled me into a hug, relief evident in his voice. "Thank you. I promise we'll figure something out soon." As we returned to the kitchen, Layla looked up with wide, innocent eyes. "Is everything all right, dears?" I forced a smile. Yes, Layla, I've decided to take some time off work to help care for you. The triumph in her eyes was unmistakable, though quickly masked by a show of concern. Oh, Sophia, I couldn't possibly ask that of you. It's already decided, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Later that day, as I called my boss to request a leave of absence, I felt a piece of my identity slipping away. My career, my independence, my dreams, all put on hold for a woman who seemed determined to control every aspect of our lives. That night, as Ethan slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had become a prisoner in my own home, and Layla held the key. A plan began to form in my mind. If Layla wanted to play games, I could play too. But unlike her, I would be playing for keeps. As I drifted off to sleep, a small, determined smile played at the corners of my mouth. Layla had no idea what she was in for. 2 weeks into my new role as Layla's full-time caretaker, I was ready to scream. The constant demands, the manipulation, the way she monopolized every moment of my day, it was driving me to the brink of sanity. Sophia! Layla's voice rang out from upstairs. I need you. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to respond calmly. Coming, Layla. I found her sitting at her vanity, a look of distress on her face. Oh, Sophia, I'm having such a terrible hair day. Would you be a dear and style it for me? I stared at her perfectly coiffed hair, disbelief washing over me. Layla, your hair looks fine, she pouted, looking at me through the mirror. But I have that luncheon with the ladies from church today. I want to look my best. The luncheon isn't for 3 hours, I pointed out. Please, Sophia, you're so good at this sort of thing. 30 minutes later, I emerged from Layla's room, my patience hanging by a thread. I needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating presence of my mother-in-law. I was halfway down the stairs when Layla called out again. Sophia, I've changed my mind about my outfit. Could you help me choose something else? Something inside me snapped. No, Layla, I can't. I'm not your personal stylist or your maid. I'm your daughter-in-law, and I deserve some respect. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. Then I heard the soft sound of sniffling. Guilt immediately washed over me, battling with my frustration. I trudged back up the stairs, finding Layla dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I'm so sorry, Sophia, she whimpered. I never meant to be a burden. Perhaps it would be best if I just went to that nursing home after all. The guilt intensified, even as a small voice in my head whispered that this was just another manipulation tactic. No, Layla, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have snapped at you. Let's find you an outfit, okay? As I helped Layla dress, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing myself in this new reality. My career, my independence, my identity, all were slipping away, replaced by an endless cycle of catering to Layla's whims. That evening, when Ethan came home, I was at my breaking point. We need to talk, I said, pulling him into the kitchen while Layla watched her evening soaps. What's wrong? Ethan asked, concern etching his features. I took a deep breath. This isn't working. Ethan, I can't keep doing this. Your mother she's taking over our lives. Ethan's brow furrowed. Sophia, we talked about this. It's temporary. Mom needs us right now. But for how long? I demanded. I've given up my job, my life. When does it end? Before Ethan could respond, Leela's voice floated in from the living room. Ethan, is that you, darling? Could you come here for a moment? Ethan gave me an apologetic look. We'll finish this conversation later, okay? As he walked away, I felt something inside me harden. This couldn't go on. I needed to take action, to reclaim my life before it was too late. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. My finger hovered over the call button as I weighed my options. If I made this call, there would be no going back. It could change everything. My relationship with Ethan, our family dynamic, maybe even our marriage. But as I heard Layla's laughter drifting in from the other room, mingling with Ethan's, I knew I had no choice. I pressed the call button, my heart pounding as I waited for an answer. When the voice on the other end picked up, I spoke quietly but firmly. Hello, this is Sophia Williams. I'd like to schedule a consultation with a private investigator. It's about my mother-in-law. I think she might be faking her illness. As I ended the call, a mix of guilt and determination washed over me. I was taking a huge risk, but I couldn't live like this anymore. One way or another, I was going to uncover the truth about Layla, no matter the cost. The private investigator's report arrived a week later, landing in my inbox with a soft ping that belied its explosive contents. I glanced around furtively, making sure Layla was occupied with her afternoon soap operas before opening the email. As I scrolled through the document, my eyes widened in disbelief. Photos, financial records, and detailed accounts painted a picture of Layla's life that was far from the frail, helpless woman who had invaded our home. There she was, laughing with friends at a country club luncheon just days before her illness struck. Another photo showed her vigorously playing tennis. Bank statements revealed large withdrawals coinciding with her sudden need for care. But it was the last page that made my blood run cold. A copy of Ethan's father's will, with a clause I'd never known about. Layla would receive a substantial monthly allowance as long as she lived with and was cared for by family. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Layla wasn't sick. She was conning us, manipulating her way into our lives for financial gain. My hands shook as I closed the laptop. Anger, betrayal, and a perverse sense of vindication warred within me. I had been right all along, but the truth was far worse than I'd imagined. Sophia? Layla's voice drifted from the living room. Could you bring me some tea, dear? I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to respond calmly. Of course, Layla. I'll be right there. As I prepared the tea, my mind raced. Should I confront her? Tell Ethan? The weight of this knowledge pressed down on me, demanding action. I carried the tea tray into the living room, studying Layla's face as I set it down. She smiled up at me, the picture of innocent gratitude. How many times had I fallen for that act? Thank you, darling, she said, reaching for the cup. You know, I was just thinking about how blessed I am to have you and Ethan caring for me. I don't know what I'd do without you. Something inside me snapped. I think you'd manage just fine, Layla. In fact, I'm sure you'd be back on the tennis court in no time. Layla's cup froze halfway to her lips, her eyes widening in shock. I don't know what you mean, Sophia. I pulled out my phone, bringing up one of the photos from the investigator's report. Really? Because this was taken just 2 weeks before you moved in with us. You look pretty spry for someone about to become an invalid. The color drained from Layla's face. For a moment, her mask slipped, revealing a calculating coldness I'd never seen before. Then, just as quickly, it was replaced by a look of hurt confusion. Oh, Sophia, she said, her voice trembling. How could you think such things, after everything we've been through together? I stood my ground, even as doubt began to creep in. Was I making a terrible mistake? No more games, Layla. I know about the clause in the will. I know why you're really here. Layla's demeanor changed instantly. The frail, helpless act vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. Well, she said, her voice sharp, I see you've done your homework, but tell me, dear, what do you plan to do with this information? The challenge in her tone caught me off guard. I realized I hadn't thought this far ahead. I'm going to tell Ethan, of course. He deserves to know the truth. Layla laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. And you think he'll believe you over me? His devoted mother who raised him? Oh, Sophia, you're more naive than I thought. Her words hit me like a physical blow. She was right. I had no idea how Ethan would react. Would he believe me? Or would this drive a wedge between us, destroying our marriage? As I stood there, frozen in indecision, Layla's voice cut through my thoughts. So, my dear daughter-in-law, what's it going to be? Are you really prepared for what happens next? I met her gaze, seeing the challenge there, the absolute certainty that she held all the cards. In that moment, I realized the true depth of the trap I was in. This wasn't just about reclaiming my life anymore. It was about exposing a lifetime of lies and manipulation. The question hung in the air between us, demanding an answer. What was I prepared to do? As I opened my mouth to respond, I knew my next words would change everything. The tension in the house was palpable after my confrontation with Layla. We danced around each other, every interaction laced with unspoken accusations and barely concealed hostility. I hadn't told Ethan yet, the weight of my discovery pressing down on me like a physical burden. One morning, as I was preparing breakfast, Layla swept into the kitchen with an air of determination. Sophia, dear, I've been thinking, she announced, her voice syrupy sweet. I feel terrible about how much you've had to sacrifice for me. I think it's time we hired a professional carer. I nearly dropped the spatula I was holding, shock coursing through me. What? Layla smiled benevolently. You've done so much, and I can see it's taking a toll. This way you can go back to work, and I'll have the care I need. It's a win-win, don't you think? My mind raced. Was this a trap? A way to make me look unreasonable if I refused? Or was Layla genuinely backing down? That's very considerate of you, Layla, I managed to say, my voice tight with suspicion. Wonderful. Layla clapped her hands together. I've already found the perfect agency. They can start next week. As Layla bustled out of the kitchen, I stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It felt like a victory, but something about it left me uneasy. True to her word, the following week saw the arrival of Sarah, a cheerful and efficient carer who quickly took over most of Layla's daily needs. I found myself with an abundance of free time, a concept that had become foreign to me over the past months. Determined to reclaim some semblance of my former life, I started job hunting. It wasn't easy. My skills were rusty, and the gap in my employment history raised eyebrows. But finally, after weeks of searching, I landed a position at a small marketing firm. The pay was less than half of what I'd earned before, but it was a start. As I settled into my new routine, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Layla seemed almost too accommodating, too willing to let me regain my independence. The Layla I knew would never relinquish control so easily. My suspicions were confirmed one evening when I overheard a conversation between Layla and Sarah. I had come home early, a migraine forcing me to leave work, and their voices drifted up from the living room. "You're doing wonderfully, Sarah," Layla was saying. "Sophia suspects nothing. Soon we'll be able to move to the next phase of our plan." Sarah's response was too low for me to hear, but Layla's chilling laugh rang out clearly. "Oh, don't worry about Ethan. He's always been easy to manipulate. Once Sophia's out of the picture, everything will fall into place." I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The migraine forgotten, adrenaline coursed through my veins. Layla wasn't backing down. She was escalating her game, and somehow she had enlisted Sarah in her schemes. My mind raced with possibilities. What was Layla planning? How deep did this deception go? And most terrifyingly, what did she mean by getting me out of the picture? I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts. I needed help, but who could I trust? Ethan was still under Layla's spell, and involving the authorities without concrete evidence seemed risky. As I sat there, paralyzed by indecision, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a reminder for Ethan's and my anniversary dinner, scheduled for the following evening. A plan began to form in my mind, desperate and risky, but potentially our only chance. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. Tomorrow night at dinner I would lay all my cards on the table. I would tell Ethan everything. The private investigator's report, the overheard conversation, all of it. It was a gamble that could cost me my marriage, but the alternative was unthinkable. As I began to prepare for the most important dinner of my life, one thought echoed through my mind. This ends tomorrow, one way or another. My heart raced as I prepared for our anniversary dinner. The weight of the hidden camera in my purse felt like a ticking bomb. I had made the decision to record everything, hoping to gather irrefutable evidence of Layla's deception. Ethan and I arrived at the restaurant, the tension between us palpable. As we sat down, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Ethan," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you about your mother." His brow furrowed. "Sophia, not this again. Can't we just enjoy our anniversary without?" "No," I interrupted firmly. "This can't wait. I have proof that Layla has been lying to us." I pulled out my phone, showing him the photos from the private investigator. Ethan's face paled as he scrolled through them, disbelief etched across his features. This can't be real," he muttered. "It is," I insisted. "And there's more. I overheard her talking to Sarah. They're planning something, Ethan. Something to get rid of me." Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you saying?" Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from our neighbor. "Emergency at home. Come back immediately." We rushed back, my mind racing with possibilities. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw Layla on the front porch, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she cried. "There was a break-in. They took everything." We entered the house, finding it in disarray, but something felt off. The chaos seemed staged. As Layla sobbed dramatically, recounting the supposed break-in, I noticed Ethan's expression hardening. He had seen it too. "Mom," he said quietly, "stop. Just stop." Layla froze, her tears suddenly drying up. "What do you mean, darling?" Ethan held up my phone, still displaying the damning photos. "Explain this." The change in Layla was instantaneous and chilling. Her vulnerable facade melted away, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "Well," she said, her voice icy, "I see Sophia has been busy. I underestimated you, dear." "Why?" Ethan demanded. "Why would you do this to us?" Layla laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Why? Because I deserve it. I spent years caring for your father, putting my life on hold. This is my reward." As she spoke, I discreetly activated the hidden camera in my purse, capturing every word. "But the illness, the constant demands," I pressed. "Was it all an act?" "Of course it was," Layla sneered. "And you both fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. It was almost too easy." Ethan's face crumpled in pain and betrayal. "Get out," he whispered. "Excuse me?" Layla's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Get out," Ethan shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "You have 1 week to leave. After that, I'm cutting you off completely." Layla's composure cracked, panic flashing in her eyes. "You can't do that. I'm your mother." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You're a liar and a manipulator. We're done." As Layla's protests grew more frantic, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. But then Layla's eyes locked onto mine, filled with a hatred so intense it made me step back. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll regret this, Sophia. I promise you that." As she stormed upstairs, slamming doors behind her, I turned to Ethan. His face was a mask of pain and confusion. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, reaching for his hand. He pulled away, his voice hollow. "I need some time. It's too much." As Ethan walked out, leaving me alone in the wreckage of our living room, the full weight of what had just happened crashed down on me. We had won, but at what cost? The house felt eerily quiet, the aftermath of our confrontation hanging heavy in the air. Upstairs, I could hear Layla moving around, no doubt plotting her next move. I sank onto the couch, exhausted and overwhelmed. The battle was over, but I had a sinking feeling that the war was just beginning. As I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of Layla's staged break-in, one question echoed in my mind. What would she do next? The week following Layla's exposure was a whirlwind of tension and barely contained chaos. Ethan had retreated into himself, spending long hours at work and barely speaking when he was home. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, torn between relief that the truth was out and fear of what was to come. Layla, for her part, oscillated between fits of rage and bouts of theatrical despair. One moment she'd be hurling accusations and threats, the next sobbing and begging for forgiveness. It was exhausting and nerve-wracking, never knowing which version of her we'd encounter. On the eve of her departure, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard raised voices from the living room. I crept closer, my heart pounding. "You can't do this to me, Ethan," Layla wailed. "I'm your mother. Where am I supposed to go?" Ethan's voice was strained but firm. "We've been through this, Mom. You lied to us, manipulated us. You can't stay here anymore." "It's all Sophia's fault," Layla spat. "She turned you against me. She never understood our bond." I flinched at the venom in her words, but Ethan's response made my heart swell. "No, Mom, this is on you. Sophia has been nothing but patient and kind, even when you were treating her horribly. It's over." Suddenly, Layla's tone changed, becoming sickly sweet. "Darling, please. I know I made mistakes, but can't we start over? I'll do better, I promise. Just give me one more chance." There was a long pause, and for a terrifying moment, I thought Ethan might cave. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with finality. "No, Mom, it's too late for that. You need to leave tomorrow, as we agreed." I heard Layla's sharp intake of breath, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Rushing into the living room, I found Ethan standing amid the shattered remains of a vase, Layla nowhere in sight. "Are you okay?" I asked, reaching for him. Ethan nodded, looking dazed. "She just lost it, threw the vase and stormed upstairs." We spent the next hour cleaning up the mess, the silence between us thick with unspoken emotions. As we finished, Ethan finally met my eyes. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for not believing you sooner, for putting you through all this." I felt tears welling up. "It's okay. We're going to get through this together." Just as we embraced, a blood-curdling scream echoed from upstairs. We raced up to find Layla sprawled at the bottom of the attic stairs, clutching her leg. "Help me," she cried. "I've fallen. I think it's broken." Ethan immediately moved to help her, but I held him back, suspicion flaring. "Wait," I whispered. "Remember the last time?" He hesitated, conflict clear on his face. Layla's cries grew more insistent. "Please, I'm in agony. Call an ambulance." I stepped forward, my voice steady. "Layla, we're going to call for help, but first I want you to stand up." Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. "How dare you? Can't you see I'm injured?" "Stand up," I repeated firmly, "or we'll assume this is just another act." For a moment the room was silent, except for Layla's labored breathing. Then, slowly, incredulously, she got to her feet, her supposedly broken leg bearing her weight just fine. "You heartless bitch," she snarled at me. "You've ruined everything." Before I could react, she lunged at me, her hands clawing for my face. I stumbled backward, nearly falling down the stairs myself. Ethan intervened, pulling his mother away. "That's it," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "You're leaving now. Tonight." As Ethan dragged Layla away to pack her bags, I leaned against the wall, my legs weak with relief and residual fear. We had won, but the victory felt hollow. Looking at Ethan's pained expression as he argued with Layla down the hall, I realized we still had a long way to go. The immediate threat was nearly over, but the emotional fallout was just beginning. As I heard Layla's shrill protests and Ethan's weary responses, I steeled myself for one last confrontation. Tomorrow our house would be free of Layla's presence, but would our lives ever truly be free of her influence? Only time would tell. 6 months after Layla's dramatic exit from our lives, I stood in our newly redecorated living room, taking in the peace that had finally settled over our home. The last traces of Layla's presence had been erased, replaced by colors and furnishings that Ethan and I had chosen together. As I sipped my morning coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Claire, a family friend who had once been close to Layla. I opened it with trepidation, half expecting another plea on Layla's behalf. Instead, I found myself staring at a photo that made my blood run cold. It showed Layla, looking haggard and unkempt, working behind the counter of a dingy convenience store. The caption read, "Karma's a bitch, isn't it?" I felt a complex mix of emotions wash over me, satisfaction, pity, and a lingering anger that surprised me with its intensity. Layla had faced the consequences of her actions, stripped of the comfortable life she had schemed so hard to maintain. "What is it?" Ethan's voice startled me. He had come up behind me, peering over my shoulder at the phone. I handed it to him wordlessly, watching his face as he took in the image. His expression hardened, then softened, a myriad of emotions playing across his features. "I never wanted this for her," he said quietly. "Despite everything, she's still my mother." I nodded, understanding his conflict. "I know, but she made her choices, Ethan. We can't take responsibility for that." He set the phone down, pulling me into a tight embrace. "You're right, it's still hard sometimes." As we stood there holding each other, I realized how far we'd come. The strain that Layla had placed on our marriage had nearly broken us, but we'd emerged stronger, more united than ever before. The doorbell rang, interrupting our moment. I opened it to find a courier holding a thick envelope. "Delivery for Sophia and Ethan Williams," he announced. I signed for the package, my curiosity piqued. As soon as the door closed, I tore it open, Ethan looking on with equal interest. Inside was a legal document, its language dense and official. But the gist of it was clear. Layla was relinquishing all claims to Ethan's father's estate, including the monthly allowance she had manipulated us for. "I don't understand," Ethan murmured, reading over my shoulder. "Why would she do this now?" Attached to the document was a handwritten note. With trembling hands, I unfolded it and read aloud. "Sophia and Ethan, I know these words can never undo the harm I've caused. My actions were inexcusable, driven by greed and a misguided sense of entitlement. Losing everything, my home, my status, and most importantly, my family, has forced me to confront the person I've become. I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But I hope that by relinquishing these final ties, I can offer you both the clean break you deserve. Live your lives free from my shadow. Be happy and know that I truly regret the pain I've caused. Layla." As I finished reading, I looked up to see tears in Ethan's eyes. My own vision blurred as the weight of Layla's words sank in. "Do you think she means it?" I asked softly. Ethan took a deep breath. I don't know, but I think this is the closest to an apology we're ever going to get. We sat in silence for a long moment, processing this unexpected turn of events. Finally, I spoke. What do you want to do? Ethan met my gaze, his eyes clear and determined. I want to move forward, with you. We've given her enough of our lives already. I nodded, feeling a sense of finality settle over me. Together, then? As we embraced once more, I felt the last lingering traces of tension leave my body. The ordeal with Layla had tested us to our limits, but we had survived. More than that, we had reclaimed our lives and our relationship. Looking around our home, our sanctuary, I knew that whatever challenges the future held, Ethan and I would face them as a united front. We had weathered the storm of Layla's manipulation and emerged stronger for it. As the morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over our renewed life together, I felt a profound sense of peace. The chapter with Layla was finally truly closed. And our story, Ethan's and mine, was just beginning anew.